Okay, namaste everyone. Good evening. Uh, Welcome to IndicTalks. And today we have very special guest, Dr. Subhash Kak. He needs no introduction. He inspires a lot of Indic seekers every day with his, research papers, his books, his comments, observation on various things or various civilizational issue. I must say, whether it comes from humanities or from science part, as I was telling just right now to Dr. Kak, that he is someone who straddles both world, science and humanity, with so much ease. So we are big fan of him because we get a lot of insights from him regarding because there's a lot of confusion in various fields, whether it's come to quantum mechanics, how to understand quantum mechanics from Indic perspective, and on the other hand, how to understand Indic perspective from our own traditional way. So Dr. Kak has always been an inspiring figure for us and always someone who has been educating us on a regular basis, on daily basis almost through Facebook, through his Twitter and all those things. So I'll not go for formal introduction. Already you know him very well. So coming to the topic and today I have requested him to talk about Shad Darshana, how we can understand Shad Darshana, because Shad Darshana are core of Indian civilizational ideas. Okay, but because they are six in number, in fact, they are more in number, but they are six as coherently and put together. But why they are put together coherently and maybe complementarily, as Subhash Kak always put it in that way. So I have always been curious that why our civilization created six darshana, not more, not less, how they are related to each other. We have seen that they have debated with each other for centuries and they have diverse opinion, even conflicting opinion on many things. So how to approach them, how to understand them holistically. So all these questions are in all of our mind. So I request Dr. Kak, so please enlighten us on this issue and help us understand and navigate through Shad Darshana. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ram. Delighted to be a part of this conversation. Very important and fundamental question. Why do we have six darshanas, and why do we have stories about debates, very heated debates in the followers of these darshanas? But before I come to all of this and clarify the whole situation, let me begin by telling you what the foundation of the Vedic vision of reality is, which is what informs all of these darshanas. The foundational view is that there is apara and para. Apara is material or conceptual, para is consciousness. So in contrast to other civilizations which privilege materiality, the Indian civilization speaks of the two, materiality and consciousness, as a pair. And understanding is bridging the two, because each individual is also material. We have bodies, but we are also consciousness, right? Now, in contrast, the Asuric view, because India also speaks of the Asuric view, and the Asuric view is the definition of an asura is asushu indriyeshu ramante iti asuraha. Those who take pleasure only in breath and sensations are the asuras. In other words, asuras are who believe in nothing but the body, right? So the Indic view is that there is the body, but there has got to be the complementarity of consciousness, which is not, which does not emerge from the body, which is para, which transcends the body, but is also infused in the body, right? Now, given this, if true understanding can only be seen by getting to really be connected, in connected in the sense of knowledge with the para, and para is not something that can be arrested or represented in language. As we know in one of the Mundaka Upanishad, para is beyond language. Whatever can be expressed in language is apara. So then you can see para only through different lenses, right? And now the question arises, how many lenses can there be? And so when you go back to, and so the lenses, what you see through the lenses is each darshana. So there can be many different darshanas, because this is something which is transcendent, which is within us and beyond us. And we can, based on what our sadhan is, what our sadhana is, what our temperament is, and based on how we have analyzed the lens itself, which is the manas, which is the mind, because it's through the mind we are looking at reality. So based on all of these things, one can speak of many different darshanas, right? Now, traditionally, when you read the Mahabharata, for example, many darshanas are listed. For example, the Pashupatas, right, or the Charvakas, or you have the Arhats, or you certainly have the Bauddha darshan, and later on, a very famous book by the great Acharya and Rishi Vidyaranya in the 13th or the 14th century, who is believed to have been the older brother of Sayanacharya, the great prime minister in the Vijayanagara Empire, and also who wrote commentaries on the Vedic texts. So in Sarva Darshan Sangraha, Vidyaranya speaks of 16 darshanas. So you have 16 darshanas where he speaks of the Charvakas also, or the Madhvas, or Pananiya, which is the grammarian view of reality. If you talk of reality in terms of language, then what does grammar unveil? And that is the Pananiya approach, and Pratyabhigya, which is recognizing one's own true self, which is one of the schools from Kashmir, for example, and many others. So there are 16, and I've written an article on it called The Nine Darshanas, which is accessible readily, and you can see all of them. But in my view, 6 are fundamental. If 6 is the iconical number, it is indeed the correct number, because the others also speak of the sadhana that you will use in using your lens, right? Because you have to have a sadhana, you have to have your own tapas through which you prepare yourself in order to see what reality is like. So that becomes a bit more subjective. If you want to leave out the subject and you want to analyze it in the most basic analytical way, then 6 is the right number. And these are all complementary. And why are they 6? Imagine you're out in space, and here you're in a room with walls which are at right angles, so that each view would be unique. So how many perspectives will you have? You'll have exactly 6 perspectives. You'll be standing on the floor and you can see through the floor. All these walls are transparent. You'll see through the floor, and the floor represents your tradition, and analysis of that tradition, which is what Mimamsa is, right? So the floor is Mimamsa. Then on one side, how do we navigate our way through reality is through logic, right? And from logic allows us to draw inferences. So that is Nyaya. And logic deals with atoms of statements, right? Because you have statements, and there are subject, object, verb, connections if you look at it from the Paraniya grammar. So you have these connections, but you need to infer based on what your starting point is to see where you can go. So that is Nyaya. Opposite that, now Nyaya deals with what we produce through our speech, but we ourselves are constituted by materiality, right? And so, what are the atoms of matter? That is Vaisheshika. So, that is the opposite view, right? So, Vaisheshika Kanada Sutras, and it's absolutely incredible. Those of you who have not read Kanada Sutras, I translated this 6 years ago, and it's readily available. It's a book called Matra and Mine, and you'll see that there are two of the three Newtonian's laws of motion are there in almost exactly the same words. It's absolutely incredible, and it's at least 500 BCE. Why don't we know about it? I think that's a very sad thing. But that apart, it has such incredible stuff. It's not just atoms, that there are 4 different atoms, and 2 of them have matter, 2 of them are without matter, quite like proton, electron, and photon and neutrino. I'm not suggesting that Kanada saw it in those terms, but through his insight, he comes up with a structure with 4 different atoms, and they are not necessarily, because they are called Prithvi, Apaha, Tejas, and Vayu, but they are not to be viewed as earth and water, because what is stated in this tradition is that if you take a lump of gold and you heat it, it becomes liquid. So it becomes apas, right? So in other words, the water atoms, which is liquidity, it's solidity and liquidity. Liquidity is a part of solidity, because when you heat it, that comes out. You heat it further, it starts blazing, which means that the Tejas atom is also a part of matter. And then if you do it further, it loses mass. So Vayu takes away its mass. So that is also a part of matter as we see it. So they're all a part of it. So these are so we've covered 3. Then on one side you have Sankhya, because materiality is looking at reality in very gross terms, that here are these atoms and they are connected and they are probably vibrating in different ways with respect to each other. But we don't see matter in such terms. We don't see atoms as they are. What we see are cognitions which have their own categories. So how many categories can these cognitions have? What is the whole structure? What are these tattvas? They're called tattvas. And for that, you have the Sankhya system. So that's one wall. Sankhya has 25 tattvas, right? It starts with the Mahabhutas, then Tanmatras, then Karmendriyas, the Gyanendriyas. So this is how the conceptual categories accumulate. And then beyond that, you have Manas, Ahankar, and Buddhi, right? And then Prakriti and Purush. So this is the structure. So this is how we see ourselves when we are trying to analyze ourselves. We are not analyzing ourselves in atomic terms, but in terms of these fundamental cognitive categories. On the opposite side of that is yoga, where, and those of you who have done sadhana of one kind or the other and gone within your own system, because here we are walking normally, we are not seeing, when we are walking, doing our daily things, we're not seeing who we are. We are one whole. But when you are reflective, when you are doing your dhyana, and you want to then question as to who you are, you look within, and you can question yourself in so many different ways, in terms of who your body is, or what your body is, or what are these sensations composed of. And so you go within, and which is what yoga is, right? And yoga, in my view, is Veda practice. This the six darshanas, and then the ceiling. So this is yoga, which is opposite Sankhya. Sankhya is analysis. Yoga is synthetic, right? You go within, and it's associated with one's own sadhana. And then the ceiling is Vedanta, the essence of the Vedas, which brings it all together. So these are foundational. We are not talking about any Ishta Devata in any of these, right? Because Ishta Devata comes in when you want to do your sadhana, because you do Ishta Devata is that light within you, which guides you through this maze of the very structure of your consciousness. In fact, I wrote a book 20 years ago called The Gods Within, that Devatas are within us. They are constituents of our consciousness. Now, so we see, okay, so these are all complementary paths, right? Complementary views, because you have this reality, and we are using this analogy. We have reality, which is transcendent, which is infinite all around us. And here we are in a room, which is our body, and this room has six walls, right? And so there are six fundamental views associated with reality, because there can only be six walls which are at right angles, which are totally independent in terms of their information. Now, we can have many other views also. You can look at angles from a slightly tilted ways, etc. And there can be many, many more darshanas, but they are not fundamental. Six are fundamental. Now, there is a very wonderful discussion in Bhagavad Puran between Yudhishthir and Narad. Yudhishthir comes to Narad and asks Narad as to how is one to live one's life, because as we know, this life is full of disappointment and despair, and one can feel lost. So what Narad tells Yudhishthir is that what you have to do is to do your whatever shiksha that is a part of your education. You do that, and which are the darshanas or your sadhana, or whatever education. You've gone to college, you've gone to university, you sharpen your mind, you sharpen your logic by going through all the exercises that are a part of education, right? And also self-questioning. You just don't take this stuff that's being told you. Learning is not just doing the part, it's also to do the manan and the chintan and that examination of all of this. So you do all of that, and then using any of these darshanas, you come to a crisis point. You come to a place where you cannot explain what it is. And which is why when people from different darshanas come together, they are pushing each other. That's the right way of looking at it. They are trying to push each other, because it's only when you have reached that crisis point, which is called Parocha, right? You have Pratyaksha, which is very clear. If there's something Pratyaksha, everybody sees it for what it is, right? And everything which is material and it's in front of you, it's Pratyaksha. But you reach a point where you don't understand what it is. And we see it in modern science as well. For example, everybody, you go anywhere, you talk to a modern man, and they would say, yes, we are all free individuals. Well, but modern science doesn't give freedom. Modern science says that all the unfolding of the universe is governed by the past. So there is no freedom at all. So this is a point of crisis that tells you that there is a limitation to what you have assumed is knowledge, modern scientific knowledge. So modern scientific knowledge is not comprehensive, because it doesn't have any place for the individual and for freedom. So this is what debate is required for, And that's why people used to get together. And it's at that time when you're, because, normally even a wise person, because of force of habit, takes things for granted, in normal things, because habit means that you're just doing things mechanically. There's this beautiful image in the tradition that I come from, where it's stated that every individual is a pashu, and pashu is guided entirely by instinct, right? It's only when the pashas, the ropes which bind us to our instincts, are cut, and that those are cut if you go to the very heart of yourself, and within yourself resides Pashupati, right? And that's when you become Shiva, Shivoham, right? Now, there's all kind of totally totally wrong stuff that you find even when you look at philosophy or Indian texts in the colleges, that they say, hey, Shaivism arose so much after the Vedas, so Shaivism was maybe a few centuries, or you look at Shvetashvatara Upanishad, maybe it's CE, etc. It's all totally nonsense. I'm not talking about the actual text dates, but look, what's the heart of the Veda? The heart of the Veda is I am Atma Brahma, for example, these Mahavakyas, or Aham Brahmasmi. While in Shaivism, you have Chaitanyam Atma, which is exactly the same thing. Chaitanya, the Chaitana itself is the Atman, right? Which is the same thing as Aham Brahmasmi, or which is the same thing that I am, I am Atma, right? So it's the same thing. So fundamentally, then to go back to the story of Yudhishthir and Narad, the whole idea in one sadhana is to push the cognitive categories which are associated with the sadhana to the limit. When you reach that paroksha, and that paroksha makes you take a leap beyond where your knowledge stood. And that is what yajna is. That is what sacrifice is. That is when you cease to be who you were and become somebody else, because this is a kind of a ladder. In fact, I wrote a book on this. I was flying from Washington, D.C. to Houston. I think it was 2002 or something. And suddenly, in a flash, as the stewardess came to me with my cup of tea, the flash, there were these 18 sutras that came. And I finally wrote up a little book on it, which is called the Prajna Sutra, where I speak of these three foundational aspects. Bandhu, which is the connections between our Chitta Akasha and Chidakasha, our consciousness and the cosmic consciousness. Because there are these bandhus, that's what makes it possible to know. Because one could very easily ask, how is it even possible to know? And in Western philosophy, people do ask this question. If they're all computers around the world, how would the computers, which are only looking at patterns, be able to determine the overarching logic of this reality? They would not be able to. And in fact, this has been a debate for some time. And there are those who believe that computers will become conscious. And I am one of those who believe they won't become conscious. But this is a bigger story, and we'll come to that sometime later. But let me come back to this Prajna Sutra. You have Bandhu, Paroksha, and Yajna. So Yajna is where you are able to go beyond the Paroksha, which is what your Darshana stops its vision, and then, because the Darshana ultimately is a vision in terms of an image, in terms of analytical categories, in terms of linguistic categories. And for true knowledge, you have to go beyond those categories and transcend that. And that's where that is something that's a phenomenon that occurs within you in a spontaneous way, and suddenly you have that darshan. And that darshan can occur differently. It can occur in a ritual, in a formal ritual, or spontaneously. You're walking in the forest, or you've been up several hours at night and trying to in a line in the street. It's cold, and you want to actually go to the mandir and get the darshan of the Ishtadevata there, the deity, and then something happens. In that cold, you're dissociated from your normal safety net, which makes you the Pashu that you are, because we are also Pashus, right? Normally we are Pashus, so we can't see. We really don't have that darshan. And then something snaps, and you've changed, and you've become a new person. So to come back, I must also say now, six is truly fundamental, and these darshanas are not associated with any particular sadhana. You can. These are universal for all of mankind, in my view, and this is the only way you can make sense of the world. And as we know, they have made a lot of influence on the world already. Look at Vedanta. You look at the creation of quantum mechanics. You look at Schrodinger, who claimed that the ideas that he picked up on Vedanta were the central leap which allowed him to come up with this idea of superposition. I am Atma Brahma. This was the idea which made him see that what one needed to talk of microstates was to look at all possibilities in a superposition. So it has already had tremendous influence on many different fields. In fact, I know some of the world's great scientists, some personally, and many of them in their own personal belief system are Vedantins. And certainly Schrodinger speaks of it in his books very clearly. You read his book, What is Life, or his own autobiography and so on. He is very insistent that this is this comprehensive view. And you look at all other great scientists also, or many, not all, many of them did see that that you can't just talk of matter. You also have to speak of the fundamental role the observer has in looking at the development of the knowledge system. And in fact, even in classical physics, the observer is always outside of the system. Nobody gave any thought to it until quantum mechanics came along. Or you look at Vaisheshika. Vaisheshika has not been much in vogue in India, unfortunately, because Vaisheshika is beautiful. In fact, all the six of them are as beautiful as any other. So it's not that you got to look down on somebody, and certainly each of them allows one, through sharpening of one's buddhi, of one's intellect, to ultimately reach a point and to suppress one's ego, because what stops true understanding is ahankar. The moment you think that, hey, this is my lens is showing me everything, because it cannot. Each lens only provides you a certain image. It's linguistic, it is apara. So ahankar comes in there. So of course, there are some people who are still studying in their own traditions. And when they are students, ahankar does come in, because that is something that's a driver. So then they are very dogmatic. But ultimately, a true traveler on the path of knowledge realizes that knowledge doesn't come from within. Knowledge doesn't come from the body, from the sharir, if you will. It comes in from somewhere else. It comes in from that interface of prakasha and vimarsha. This is in Kashmir Shaivism. Shiva is also called prakash, and Shakti or Devi is called vimarsha. So it's at that interface. We are also prakriti, and we are also prakash. So it's at that interface that change happens. So Well, a little autobiographical story related to Vaisheshika. In the last couple of years, after having done the Vaisheshika Sutra, my commentary and the translation, which was published in 2016, this was in the back of my mind because uh, then 2 years ago, suddenly I asked the question, why is it that one must believe, which is something that's been believed in modern science for several centuries, that space is three-dimensional, right? That is, even Einstein, he didn't jettison space as three-dimensional. He only said that this three-dimensional space has bends and it's not rectangular. So I and this therefore was inspired by Kannada, by Vaisheshik Sutras, and of course I've been into the other darshanas as well. And I pushed it further, and I was able to show that logic itself, it's not binary, which is optimal, but rather ternary, if you're talking of it in terms of integers. But in reality, it's 2.718. If you have 2.718 or E categories, and as to what it means is a scientific question, which I will not get into right now. And I was able to show that space itself should be E-dimensional. And using this, and I published many papers on this, and you can Google the E-dimensional universe, which will send you to many, many links on this, and all these published papers in the last 2 years. I was able to show that you can solve one of the biggest problems in modern cosmology, which is why is the Hubble's constant, which is the rate at which the universe is expanding, different based on two different kinds of measurements. If you use the background microwave radiation, you get a certain rate. But if you use old stars and see how much they've gone apart in millions of years, you get a different rate. If you look at E-dimensionality, then you are able to resolve this problem. And as I published 2 years ago, a paper in Nature Scientific Reports on this, and I published a whole series of papers, and they all came out of really the freedom that the darshanas give us, because these darshanas inspired, no doubt, by the by the direct vision that the rishi had. They look at things with as much of clarity as possible. For example, in Kannada's sutras, there's also place for manas and atma, because they also play a role in how the universe evolves. And this is a big paradox in quantum mechanics. And the paradox is that if because quantum mechanics, also the orthodox interpretation, accepts that you have matter and then you have consciousness, and they are like two sides of same reality, two sides of a coin. One side you have matter, the other side you have consciousness. But then the question arises, if there are two different things, how does one influence the other? If consciousness is not material, how can it influence matter, right? And my late friend, the great Indian physicist, George Sudarshan, and his student in the 1970s, wrote a paper on this, which they called the quantum Zeno effect, where they showed how by just observation, you can freeze the state of a system, the evolution of a system, or even by observation in a particular way, you can orient the evolution of the physical system in a particular way. So just by observation, you can do it. And this is something which was said in the Indian tradition a long time ago, because these questions had come up. The question had come up: how does the deity create the world? Because the deity is apart from the world. You have rhythm or rit meaning laws. All Prakriti evolves through rhythm, right? Through laws. Then how does the deity come in? How does the Purush come in? How does Vishnu or Shiva come in, right? So the answer was given in the Vedantic tradition as the Drishti Srishti Vada. that Srishti occurs through Drishti, that Shiva doesn't have to actually physically create the world. The specific Drishti creates Srishti. It's incredible, absolutely mind-boggling, extraordinary. I can't tell you how extraordinary it is. You look at the most subtle current ideas, and you look at ancient books, and you see these questions debated in total clarity, the same questions asked and the answers given. And as George Sudarshan showed, that you can do it, and this has become an important part of quantum mechanics right now, and people are going to be winning Nobel Prizes and so on, that you can therefore influence reality by observation through Drishti. So let me stop here. I've done my 40 minutes. This is what Ram had told me, and I'll be happy to, take off in different directions based on questions that you might have.
Yeah, namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Yeah. I have a question related to sakam or niskam karm. That what is how sometimes it is affecting us and sometimes not. Yeah.
Okay. This is, of course, Krishna speaks about it in the Bhagavad Gita. Nishkam is, when ahankar comes in, that is what sakam is. And ahankar, as I already mentioned in my conversation earlier on, my comments, ahankar is destructive, because ahankar is when you think, I am doing it. We are really not doing it. We are nimitta matra, as they say. We are really instruments. If you allow yourself to be an instrument, that's when the Devi speaks through you. The Devi takes you where you are to go. If you think you are doing it, then you are like a robot in an unknown place, stumbling here and there. You see that? Because then the horses, the senses, the indriyas, the horses are going off in different directions. This image of the rath and the indriyas. So sakam, but you have to be dedicated. You have to be totally dedicated to what the goal is. So but it's a nishkam goal. It's not that you are doing it. You have to let go. And so there's a paradox here. And that's one of the insights of the Vedas, that all of this is parocha. All of these in our actions also, there is parocha. These are paradoxes which unfold through us, and we see them unfold through us. And as they unfold through us, we become more understanding of the very nature of our own self. And that's what takes us to the Purush, to the Maheshwara, because even Krishna in Bhagavad Gita says that the Ishvara within us, within each prani is Maheshwara. Let's just say Ishvara. To the Ishvara within each one of us. And we are then that Ishvara. It's beautiful.
So today is also Punya Tithi of Ramanujan, the great mathematician. So ये जो नामगिरी देवी इनकी कुल देवी हैं, ये जो स्टोरी हम जानते हैं, तो क्या somehow ये उस तरह से कि डेटी को हम समर्पित करते हैं अपने कार्य को, तो kind of profound thinking ideas it can bring.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल. देखिए, मैं तो आपसे ये कहूंगा कि जो कुछ क्रिएटिव भी होता है किसी भी व्यक्ति में, तो वो उसके भीतर से नहीं आता है. उसको अपने आप को समर्पित करना होता है, समर्पण करना होता है. और वो जब तक हम ये ना सिखा पाए बच्चों को कॉलेज में, स्कूल में, कि समर्पण करो, लेट गो. और जो शिक्षा हमारी इस समय की है वो अहंकार बेस्ड शिक्षा है, वो आसुरी शिक्षा है, वो शरीर बेस्ड शिक्षा है. तो जब आपकी शरीर बेस्ड शिक्षा होगी तो फिर आपका उस समय पर्पस ये होता है कि मैं कैसे डोमिनेट करूं. जो ये राक्षसी या आसुरी प्रवृत्ति है डोमिनेशन की, वो अहंकार से आती है. और लेकिन हर एक व्यक्ति जो ये सब ज्ञान है जो हर एक के भीतर वर्तमान है, उस तक पहुंच सकता है. लेकिन समर्पण बिल्कुल फंडामेंटल है उसके लिए.
Yes.
Sir, thank you so much for giving an opportunity. In fact, I cited one of your articles when I was writing for a magazine about your Sharda Peeth. So thank you so much, Indus, and thank you, sir, for this. Sir, when we were talking about Schrodinger's superimposition principle, sir, do you have any papers on that too?
Yeah, he mentions that in his own book, What is Life? But I have written many articles on consciousness and quantum mechanics. I also do work on foundation of quantum mechanics myself. And there are many of these articles. If you send me an email or if you go to my academia.edu site, and if you scroll down, you'll see some which do deal with this specific quotations where you will the specific citation.
And my second question is, when you were talking about this parapashyanti madhyama, so you mean to say any of the darshanas can lead to the ultimate? So, but that realization.
Absolutely, I truly believe in it. Any of the six darshanas, including, you have Pananiya, the grammarians also, or you look at Bhartrihari, he speaks of, you start doing manan on words. What does a word mean? What does a flower pot mean? The more manan you do, the deeper you go to the very architecture of your consciousness, the manas, which is also described, for example, and you can do this manan in so many different ways, on mandalas, on Sri Vidya, for example. Here is Sri Vidya represents Sri Chakra, represents the very nature, the structure of our consciousness, right? So how do we go through that? And that can also provide you exactly the same depth of understanding, because the deepest understanding is not linguistic, is not captured by the words of any darshana. That transcends, that is para. So any of these darshanas can take you there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, now we have one interesting question from Amit Dubey. He is asking why Acharya Shankar took Sankhya as chief opponent for Pradhan Mal, not Purvamimamsa. Would you like to go into that?
Say that again. Why did he take Sankhya?
Sankhya is, a chief opponent. Acharya Shankar took Sankhya as chief opponent, not Purvamimamsa.
Well, you can use any as a foil. I cannot explain to you. I'm not completely or very in details looked at all the Shankar texts, but he could have used any other darshana as well. Now, if he took Sankhya as the counterfoil, he could have also taken Vaisheshika. In fact, many of the modern Vedantins take Vaisheshika as a counterfoil. That's they push it, because the whole idea is, since Vaisheshika is dividing up and Vedanta is bringing things together, therefore that is a foil. So you can use any as foil. You can also use Nyaya as foil.
Sir, this is Bhartendu. The question that I have is on the comment that you made, sir, about the E dimension, which solves the both the things, the Hubble constant because of CMB and the through other observation. So can you please throw a little bit more light on that?
See, if space is E-dimensional, which is 2.718, then each dimension is 0.9 of 0.2 rather than 1. And what does it really mean if it's 0.9? Which means you can imagine, if you have objects in one dimension, they would tend to come closer each time you look at them again. And this could also be the origin of gravitation. In fact, I have a follow-up paper, which is also published in Nature Scientific Reports, where I argue that this can be the explanation of gravitation. As you know, all the work which has been done in the last 30, 40 years to unify various forces has failed to include gravitation. You've been able to do electromagnetics, the strong and the weak force, but not gravitation. This provides a new explanation for gravitation as arising from E-dimensionality. And not only that, it solves another problem. It shows that the universe, this particular cycle, it started off as one-dimensional, then 2 dimensions, and then 3 dimensions. So it's an evolution of dimensionality. And it shows why a few billion years ago, the universe started expanding, accelerating, which is, one of the new things that has come up in the last 20 years. And a lot of people have won Nobel Prizes. And how in the next billion years or so, the expansion will slow down, which is totally opposed to the view that modern cosmology, standard cosmology has. So it has many, many implications, and they've been published. And I have cosmologists who are working with me right now, because it also shows if the expansion of the universe, not just the Big Bang, just didn't go into 3 dimensions immediately. If it went through 1 to 2 to 3, this would explain why barred galaxies would come before this helical galaxies, right? And now they've discovered many barred galaxies. Barred galaxies are where the center is like a bar. Now they're discovering that there are some barred galaxies which are very ancient, which cannot be explained by the current model. So I do have some collaborators who are physicists who are very interested in this. So it has many implications. I didn't want to get into it, but you'll see references to it. And not only that, before I forget, it also has implications for our understanding of the DNA. Why is the DNA structure what it is? And I've had a paper get published on this as well very recently. A lot of stuff, and all of this, I must say, thanks to Canada. And if we have forgotten Canada, it's our fault.
Okay. Thank you, sir. We'll go through the paper that.
Yeah, they're all published. You can go to my Medium article called The EDimensional Universe, or in Academia or EDU, I have a more technical article called The Ontology of Space. At the end of it, we will see about 10, 15 published articles just in the past year, and you can go to those URLs and pull up the articles.
What are your thoughts about photon being manifestation of time, which is mentioned in Bhagavad Puran as per Nyaya Vaishishk analogy? To me, paves the way for solving the quest of the theory of everything. Your views about solution of the ultimate problem.
Okay.
Photon being manifestation of time.
See, Six Darshanas is what we are talking about, but we can enlarge upon it. And in my article, 9 Darshanas, I also argue that you can also look at vibration, spanda. Spanda is another philosophy, or you can talk of kala as a darshan, which is where kriya comes in, or krama comes in. So you can use other lenses also. Now, as to whether it solves the ultimate problem, I think that itself is problematic, because when you're talking of the ultimate theory, you're trying to explain the whole universe just as materiality. And as we know from Vedanta itself, and as we know from quantum mechanics, at least so long as you believe in the orthodox interpretation, materiality is only one side of reality. So therefore, you cannot have an ultimate theory, because where would the other side, namely consciousness, come in from? You see that? So I don't think so. The whole project of finding the ultimate theory, which has failed, of course, the string theory and so on, I don't think it is well guided, so to speak, and maybe that's the reason why it has had all the problems that it has had. But I do, for those of you who are physicists or logicians or mathematicians, I do commend to you. Please take a look at my work on E-dimensionality. A lot of scientists in the West are very, very excited, because certainly if we can explain gravitation as emerging from E-dimensionality, then that's an amazing thing. That could be wonderful. And then the very fact that it helps us understand why there are certain peculiarities to the genetic code, because of the fact that optimal representation of data itself is e-dimensional. And I have a mathematical theorem on this, which got published a couple of years ago. And so there are lots of new things that open up. And as we know, if we have a new idea, then one can apply it to a lot of things and results come very quickly. If you're attacking the same wall, which has been there a long time, the wall is 20 feet thick, it's very unlikely that you're going to be very successful. But if there's a new path, new door that's opened up, at least do take a look and see whether it could be useful to you guys in your own research.
This question is simple. In Greek logic, there are many logical fallacies. Do we have equivalent that in Nyaya, Vaisheshika, and where to find them?
Oh, of course, there is this famous Bhartrihari fallacy, for example, paradox, which is, I think it's the liar's paradox, that I'm a liar and you say I'm a liar, then you're speaking the truth, right? So there are certainly Bhartrihari. If you Google it, you will find it. And somebody wrote a paper on this as well. And there are others. I think the beautiful thing about our tradition is that the acharyas and the rishis were aware of these paradoxes, which is where this centrality to the idea of Parocha. In fact, in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it's stated, Paroksha priya ibhi devaha pratyaksha dvishaha, that the devas love what is paradoxical, and they detest which is, pratyaksha. And this was recognition of the fact that you have paradox in all lines of thought.
So they love it because they want us to go out of these paradoxes?
No, what it means is that is the nature of reality, right? Because that's the nature of the senses. The senses, because they are embodied, they come with paradoxical aspects to them. That's what it means. Now, not in the sense of agency, because the senses are only taking things in. The only agent, the indriyas are not agents. The only agent is the Atman. They are only instruments.
I think we have one basic question, but I think interesting. So let's take this up. From Amit Rena, he is asking, is there any logic behind this whole creation? If yes, how can we claim to understand that within our limited sense perception? If not, and we say it's beyond any logic, then why are we even trying to understand it by going through these various darshanas? So, yes.
Okay, Amit Raina's question is interesting. We are not looking for logic. We are only trying to describe it. There's no logic, and the acharyas were aware of it. That's why they spoke of Leela, that this reality is just Leela. It's the sport. It's the sport of the senses, right? Of the individuals that are here on this earth. And this is my view, if I haven't mentioned this before, or if you haven't come across this before, in my view, the greatest storybook that was ever written, the greatest novel, or some people call it scripture, that was ever written outside of the itihasas, right? Itihasas and the Puranas, is Yoga Vasishta, where all of these questions are discussed. You have not only recursion, you also have sport viewed at so many different levels. And that's what reality is. So ultimately, I agree, Amit, with you, no ultimate logic, but we can view it as something that just happens and we are a part of that sport. Because if certainly in the modern cosmology view also, the whole universe is going to come to an end, a cold death, because the universe is expanding in an accelerated rate. And that is horrific to imagine, that not only, at least in the cyclic model, the universe comes back. So even if the old history is destroyed, new history could be made. In the current model, the whole universe is going to die a cold death. Although not in my theory, maybe that is that
so
could be something.
Dr. Saab, this is Amit. Can I speak? Just for
yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Saab, this is Amit Rana from Houston. I also try to read all of the philosophies and all, and this is the question where I always get stuck. And you said it right. We call it's the Leela. or a play of consciousness. But we even calling it a Leela, isn't that also a part of our logic or a part of what we understood it with our limited perception? Maybe we are
Of
totally
course.
wrong in that
Of
as
course.
well.
No, you're absolutely right. As in Mundaka Upanishad, Mundaka Upanishad, that all descriptions are ultimately apara. They are not fully satisfactory. And the only satisfactory thing cannot be a story. Whatever is a story, all sciences are story. Modern sciences are story, yeah? Narratives. But true reality is not a narrative because it's para. Para can only be experience. It's a part of your being. It's being. It's not becoming.
Is there any connection between Shadang of Vedas, okay, Shadang of Vedas, six limbs of Vedas, and six Darshana? Is there any correlation between them? Okay, there.
There might very well be, because as I said, six was fundamental because there are six sides in a room, right? Four sides and top and bottom. So it could very well be also the reason why you have six elsewhere too. And then 18, for example, the 18 adhyayas of the Bhagavad Gita. You also have this idea that reality is trayi. It's triple, right? Because you have bhu, bhuvaha, swara, right? Swaha. Bhu is the earth, bhuva is the intermediate regions, swaha is the heavens, or swara is the sun, right? So 3 times 6 is 18. So 3 is, everything is triplicate, trayi vidya. The reality is triple, right? And something that is also food for thought is that, all the crisis that modern medicine is facing, because modern medicine is based on binary logic, right? And you're well or not well. And there is a problem because 30% of the people get well through placebo. You give them sugar pills or even do placebo surgery and they get well. Their physical ailment also goes away. So there's a problem there. And while Ayurveda is based on triple logic, ternary logic, and mathematically, you can show that ternary is superior to binary. It's a mathematical theorem, and you can look it up. And so this again shows something else which could be useful in further advance with problems that confront society everywhere.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kak. Sir, those who would like to begin studying Shad Darshana, where to start? Like which Darshana to begin with, and which are authoritative texts available to begin with?
Well, there are translations also of the various sutras. I told you about my own, or you have Patanjali's Yoga Sutra that's very easily available. Then you have Mimamsa Sutras, you have Kapil's, the Sankhya.
Sankhya, Karika.
So there are these in translations, in Hindi translations, in English translations, but ultimately, the sutras are to be understood through manan. The words, in the beginning, they're only words. Then you have to bring them, take them in. When you take them in, that's what transforms you. That is a part of Swadhyaya. It's like the Bhagavad Gita, as a young person, it all seems just a fast, quick story. But the deeper you go back and you find further and further layers to it. And that's what you'll find in doing any of the darshanas. And which one to take, it entirely depends on you. Vedanta is great, or if you're into Nyaya. Now, you also do know that Navya Nyaya, which was a later development, according to historians, led to the development of mathematical logic in Britain in the 19th century, because the creators of mathematical logic, which is at the basis of computer science, were these three Englishmen, Charles Babbage, Augustus de Morgan, and George Boole. And according to George Boole's wife, who was a well-known science writer, in an essay, she mentions that these three were under the mentorship of George Everest, who had been the Surveyor General of India, after whom Mount Everest is named. Although it's called Sagar Matha in Nepal, it's not called Mount Everest. Sagarmatha, one of these two. And he used to go from time to England, and he would tell these three about what he had learned about Nyaya, which arose in Bihar and Bengal more than 1,000 years ago, which is perfect, exactly equivalent to mathematical logic.
So we can begin anywhere. It depends on our temperament, interest, and all those things.
Absolutely. Your temperament, anyway, it doesn't really matter, because it's like, or you can even do grammar, Pananiya grammar, which means sharpening reasoning. Buddhi is an instrument. So going through each of these darshanas is to sharpen your buddhi and also to reduce the ahankar. These are opposites. The more you think you are doing it, the knife of the buddhi becomes dull, and then you can't really see through things. So reduce the ahankar.
And one more question I have is related to language. On one hand, we say that it exists at 4 levels, Para, Pashyanti, Madhyama, Vaikri. And on other hand, we always repeat that language cannot allow us to access the ultimate reality, or language cannot capture it. But on one hand, we also hear that Shabd Brahma, language is Brahma. How do we reconcile that? That should be.
Yeah, but that is Paravak. The ultimate comprehension is in Para. So we are calling it Vak, but it's Para. It's not an ordinary Shabd.
Right.
So you can visualize that this sound emerges and creates everything, but we are using analogies here. So the only way you can see what has happened, and it can happen to any of us, is to see that you've changed. It's that transformation, which is that punarjanma that occurs, and you can see through that transformation, something happens. It's also called chamatkar. In the Kashmiri tradition, it's called chamatkar. And that chamatkar is what you see. So you don't know what's happened, but suddenly you see. In Pratyabhigya, there's a very interesting story. Pratyabhigya is that recognition school, darshan. The story is that, let's say, a tiger cub is orphaned, and it's raised by sheep. So, and these sheep are wonderful. The tiger cub walks with them from place to place and starts to bleat and thinks that it's a sheep and wants to play with the others and so on. And then one day it's at the watering hole and looks down and sees itself. And it has in the past seen tigers and been scared and run away from them. And because it was sure that it was a sheep. And now it looks into the water and then suddenly sees that he is actually a tiger. And in that moment, a chamatkar happens. And that tiger is not a sheep anymore. So that is what happens. That's how para works. Instantaneously. And then suddenly you are reborn. This is what punarjanma is. Punarjanma is in this janma.
That's why Shabda is considered as one of the foremost pramanas as well.
Yeah, right. Well, it depends at what layer you're looking at it. Exactly. You are Shabda as something that you have totally inhered. Yeah, because then you are certain that indeed, yeah, this is what it is. You have seen it. Once you have seen it, now that the tiger has seen his own image in the water, that is the praman. Right? Because he's recognized himself. It's like Shivoham. Each one of us is Shiva. But why aren't we Shiva? Because we are only saying it. We have not felt it. The moment you feel it, then you're changed. Then you're reborn. repeat, there's nothing as extraordinary, beautiful, and wisdomful as this Vedic tradition. It's sadly misrepresented in texts and books, and we are we are told about it in anthropological terms, which scholars like Ananda Kumaraswamy and Sri Aurobindo and others vehemently said was totally wrong, and it is wrong. Every human being, every sentient being has the same Ishvara within them. This is a beautiful universal view of reality, and we not only want to get empowered ourselves, but also help others empower themselves. So thank you very much, Ram. Delighted to be a part of it.
Thank you. Beautiful, sir. Wonderful note. Would like to
Namaskar.
listen you.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Namaskar,
Namaskar, everyone. Thank you.